Hey guys, what's going on? Brian here with Classic Gbody Garage. In this video, I start work on Project Scrap National. I'm going to take you guys through all the steps that I take to get an old G-body back on the road. And in that process, I'll take you through a complete compression test and find out the true condition of this turbo V6. So first off, thank you very much for tuning in to Classic Gbody Garage, and for you millions of first-time viewers, take a look around. If you guys like what you see, please consider subscribing. And for everyone, make sure you hit that little bell notification because that will let you know when a new video has been posted. So I mentioned I'm starting work on Project Scrap National. Now, this is the Grand National that was actually sent to the junkyard. It was sent to pull apart, and they are a do-it-yourself, pull your own parts, self-serve junkyard. They had many locations throughout the US, and I've done work with them in the past, and they gave me a call when they got this car in. If you guys want to find out the real story behind this car, I'll put the link to the video about this car when I first got it down in the description below. Alright, now before I start tearing into Project Scrap National, this is what I already know about the car. I know that it runs, I know that it drives, but when it runs it has a really weird misfire. It stinks like old gas, and I'm not even sure if the transmission works because I didn't get it up to speed enough to run it through its gears. So the first thing I'm going to do is start draining all the fluids, and let's start by changing the oil. So the oil is changed, and as I was changing the oil, you guys saw me grab a little sample of it, and the reason for that is because I want to make sure the oil in the engine is not contaminated with anything. And by contamination, I mean one of three things. First off, if there is coolant in the oil, it's going to have a milky look to it. It's almost going to look like a chocolate milkshake. It's going to have a lighter brown look to it, and that's because the oil and gas are mixing together. Also, I want to make sure that the oil is not mixed with gasoline, and how you can tell that is the oil is going to be thin, thinner than usual. It's also going to smell like gas. And then the third thing, I want to make sure it doesn't have any metallic particles in it. And based on the look of this oil, it doesn't appear that there are any metallic particles swimming in here. I have a magnet, and there aren't any type of metal flakes sticking to it. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this oil through a paint strainer and make sure there aren't any aluminum fragments, because of course aluminum fragments are not going to stick to a magnet like metal fragments. But as you can see, the oil appears to be in pretty good shape. It's not sludgy. It's a pretty decent color even though it's black, but it looks like we are in good shape. As I was changing the oil, I noticed how clean the transmission pan and bolts were, and that the gasket also looked new. So I'm suspecting that when Pull Apart had this car in their shop to get it running, they also did a trans service. The fluid looks pretty clean and pink in color as it should, and it doesn't really smell burnt, so I'm gonna leave it alone for now. It's kind of odd that they wouldn't have changed the engine oil while they had it up in the air, considering how dirty it was. Alright, let's go ahead and remove this radiator cap. I already loosened it. And take a look at the coolant. Now I'm gonna go ahead and drain the coolant regardless. And it looks like it's actually in pretty good shape. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and drain it regardless. I'm going to save it. But I want to drain it because I'm going to be replacing a couple of hoses that appear to be original. And I'm also going to be replacing the thermostat as well. So when draining the coolant, you're going to find a valve located on the bottom of the radiator. And the valve is usually sticking through the core support here. And just take a pair of pliers, turn it counterclockwise. Get yourself a funnel and a container to put the coolant in, and go ahead and start draining it. Alright, so the coolant is drained, and just like the oil, I put it inside of a clear container just so I can check out the condition of it. And as you can see, it has a nice green color. It doesn't have an orange tint to it, which would show signs of rust within the system, and also if it had any type of rust particles floating around in here, which would also show degradation of the cooling system. So things are looking pretty good with the coolant itself. if I were to reuse this, which I do plan on doing, I would check it out with a coolant hydrometer to make sure the coolant is in good condition under cold conditions. So things are looking good there. Let's go ahead and drain that nasty gas. When draining the tank on this car, I can go about it a few different ways. I could pump the gas back through the filler neck, but since this Grand National is fuel injected, I can disconnect the fuel feed line and run the fuel pump to pump the tank dry, and that's the route I'm gonna take. But before I disconnect the fuel line, I need to release the fuel pressure in the system so I don't get sprayed with gas. And we'll do that by pushing on this radiator valve on the end of the fuel rail and hold a rag over it. You can also pull the fuel pump relay and wait until the engine stalls. Since the fuel pressure is released, I can now disconnect the makeshift rubber hose fuel line and hook up a 12-volt source to this lead located here on the back side of the air conditioning compressor, and that will run the fuel pump. And now I can drop the fuel line into a catch container and let the pump run until the tank is empty. And it could take a while based on how much gas is in the tank, but good thing there wasn't much left in this car. Alright, so now let's inspect this nasty gas that came out of Buick Scrap National. And I filled up an identical container with fresh gas to show you guys a direct visual comparison. And as you can see, there's a definite color difference where the old gas is turned a dark orange versus the fresh gas is a nice yellow. And you guys all know what fresh gas smells like. Well, old gas has a very distinct pungent odor. Now, gas contains volatiles, which are the components that give it the ability to burn in the combustion chamber of an engine. And those volatiles evaporate over time as the car sits and makes the gas burn less efficiently, which can cause running issues and possibly the misfire this engine has. But let's move on to the compression test first, and we can find out what we got going on. Alright, so the oil is changed, and what I'm going to do now is walk you through a complete compression test. Now, what does that do? Well, a compression test measures the PSI output of each cylinder. Now you need proper compression in order for the spark to ignite the gas. If we don't have proper compression, well, we end up with a misfire, which what this engine has. So I need to find out if we have a faulty coil, spark plug, or spark plug wire, which could cause a misfire, and of course, proper compression will also cause a misfire as well. Now, a few things we need to keep in mind before we perform a compression test. First, we have to make sure the engine has clean oil in it, which it does, because we're going to crank the engine over. Secondly, we want to make sure that we have a good battery, because we want to make sure the engine is cranking fast enough as it normally would when you would start it to give the proper compression reading. And the third thing we're going to want to do is pump a little bit of oil inside of each cylinder, because that oil is going to help lube things up and give you the proper compression reading. Now, before you dive in here and start pulling all the spark plug wires off and forget where they go, well, here's a little tip. Grab yourself a roll of masking tape, a Sharpie, go ahead and label each cylinder on the top of the valve cover, label all the spark plug wires, and then label each spark plug port on the top of the coil. Next, go ahead and lay down a couple of strips of masking tape on your workbench. Write down the cylinder number in correspondence to how they are on the engine. Then go ahead, remove the spark plugs, and set them down to the cylinder number that they came out of. Now you're ready to make the notes based on your compression test. Then all you do is thread the compression gauge hose into the spark plug hole, hook up the compression gauge, and turn the key to crank over the motor to get your reading. That's not good. Alright, so the compression test is done, and as you can see, we definitely have a serious problem here with Buick Scrap National. Cylinder number 5 having only 60 psi is more than a 10% difference between cylinders, and that is a good rule of thumb when doing a compression test, because we want to make sure all the cylinders are as close to each other as possible as far as psi goes. So in videos to come, I'm going to go ahead and crack the driver's side valve cover off and find out if the valves are at least moving. I have a feeling they are, since we do have a little bit of compression going on there, but we don't want to find out if we have a burnt piston or even a blown head gasket. Those are, of course, worst case scenarios. So hope you guys liked the video, and the steps that I'm taking so far to get this old G-body back on the road will help you on your project as well. If it did, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and of course that little bell notification, and post a comment or question below, because I do read those and I do answer them. And until the next Classic G-Body Garage video, make sure you keep those G-bodies rolling.